What's going on, everybody? Good evening. This is part 6 of our Intro to Python series. And this evening we're going to be talking about some basic file operations. So, reading the content of a file, writing to the file. And there's two ways to write to a file. You can either add to the existing content already in it, or you can just create a brand new file from Python um, and populate some data into it. So I'm just going to create a new Python file within Sublime. I'm just going to call it file intro.py. Save that. And we're just going to say my file equals sample.txt. If you're in a Mac, remember to cd into whatever directory that you've got your Python code, or wherever you save this specific file intro.py file. If you're in Windows, make sure you're uh, you're in that folder as well, and that I believe it's just do a right click within the folder, select new text document, and call the file sample.txt. You can call it anything you want, but for the scope of this tutorial, I would just call it sample.txt, and then leave it alone after that. Um, so having the file name just like this means that our Python program is going to look for that file within the same folder that our program is in. So if our program was on our desktop, but the file that we're looking for was in our downloads, we would have to include the entire path, uh, something along these lines, in order to gain access to that file. So let's continue. Let's move on to the first step. First thing we're going to do is uh, just writing to the file, and there's a couple of different ways you can do it, but I think the best way is using with open, and then the first argument is the name of the file or the path to the file, within quotes a W for write. Then we're going to say as, and we can call this object anything we want. So we're saying with open, my file is going to create a file object, and it's going to toss it into whatever variable we put here. So I'm just going to say my open file, and then we put a colon. And what I like about using with open is that you don't have to remind yourself to close the file after you're done doing stuff to it. This with open will automatically close it for us. So with open my file, we're writing to it. We're saving the object as my open file. We're going to say my open file.write. First line in the file. So we're just going to run this, and I'm going to go to my Mac terminal. If you're on Windows, just open up that sample.txt file. If you're in Mac, you could also open up your Finder, look for the file and open it, or you can just say open and then the name of the file. And there we go. We wrote first line in the file in our sample.txt file. So now that file is completely written to. We don't have to write to it again, except for when we start talking about appending. But now we're going to read content from the file. So again, we're going to use with open my file. This time we're going to use the R for read, as we can call it my open file as well. It doesn't really matter what we call it. And what we're going to set a variable equal to my open file dot read. So I'm just going to say content equals my open file dot read. Now isn't going to exactly give us any structure. It's just going to take all the content in the file and throw it in one giant string. And I'm just going to print content. So run and execute, and as you see, we get first line in the file, just like what we wrote in this portion. So I'm going to comment this out as well. Now we're going to append to the file, and again with open my file. We're going to throw an A in here for append as my open file, and there's not a dot append or anything like that for file operations. So we're going to just use a dot right, second line in the file. And just keep in mind, this first line in the file doesn't force the next line, doesn't force this next line that we're going to write. It doesn't force it to go on the following line in the file. If we just write it this way, then this text right here is going to be literally next to the first line. So in this case, we're going to put a \n in front of our string here, and that's basically going to push this this text to the next line under this first line. And \n just basically means new line. So if I put the \n here, then the next thing that I write to the file is going to be written on the line beneath this line. So we'll just keep this for simplicity. Put 2 exclamation points, and I'm just going to run it. And if we open up our sample.txt file again, we're going to see second line in the file. And then the last thing I'm going to show you, since we talked about lists already, we're going to read our lines in the file. We're going to read them into a list. And this, as you're developing applications, as you're continuing to learn about Python and just programming overall, you're going to find things like this very useful. Read each line in the file into a list. So it's literally going to read every line and then make every line an element within the list. So we're going to say with open my file, and as you know, we're reading it as my open file, and we're going to say my list is equal to my open file dot read lines, and I'm just going to print the entire list. And you're going to see we have the first line in the file and the second line in the file, because read lines reads the file line by line, and we populate a new element in our list by every line, and we get them in order as well, which is pretty nice. So, and say for example, I'm actually going to uncomment this. Say for example, you wanted to remove one of these exclamation points um, from the file, or let's just say I want to remove the second line altogether. So we're going to open and read our file content into a list as we've done right here. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to say my list uh, one, because remember in lists the placeholders, the indexes go as 0 and 1. So the placeholder in the list starts from 0 and then it goes to 1 as we go down each element in the list. So we want to get rid of the second line. So we know that we need to get to excuse me. We know that we need to get to the first index, which just or index 1 instead. Actually, there's a better way to do this. I'm going to say my list dot remove. Remember, we've used the remove method for lists to remove an element. And instead of typing out second line in the file, now this will work for sure, but say we don't know exactly what's in the file. We have some program that's uh, running on its own and doing this on its own. We don't, and we know in any case that we want to remove the second line of the file. We don't want to constantly try and guess what's in that second line. And I don't know if this is completely practical, but I just want to give you some ideas about what you can do. So I know I want to remove the second line. So I'm going to do a mylist.remove, and I'm going to call mylist again. And I'm going to reference the first index, index 1. And we know from previous tutorials that getting the uh, getting the index from the list is going to return the actual element that's in that index. So this my list open close bracket 1 is second line in the file. So that'll remove the second line. Now rewrite the file. I'm going to say with open my file, write as my open file. And we are going to say, because we're dealing with a list here, now our list at this point only has one element. So we can simply write my open file, my open file dot write my list index 0, because we know there's only one element. But say we have more elements, and I'm going to briefly introduce you to for loops here. We'll talk about loops in the next tutorial. But I'm going to iterate through my list. So we're going to say for element in my list. It's almost like writing in plain English. My open file dot write element. So I'm pretty sure you guys are good at this by now. So we're looking at every element in my list, and once the first element gets written into the file, then the for loop is gonna go back up and go to the next element in the list, and it's gonna keep doing that until it runs out of elements to check in the list. So let's go ahead and do that. Run it, open sample.txt, and you'll see that first line of the file is the only line that's remaining. So I hope that made some sense. I hope you guys learned something. This was very basic file operations, and we're going to use this in our basic login.py later on, um, to basically save a new user's username and password when they create an account. And then following that, uh, we're going to have a user log in, and we're going to read that file, and we're going to make sure that they're typing in the correct password. So our file is going to have the username and the password, and it's going to check to make sure the username exists. And if the user typed the correct username, then it's going to check the password they typed. If that password exists for that username in the file, then we allow the user to log in. So sounds like a lot of gibberish for right now, but I promise you'll get it once we get to that point. Thank you so much for your time. You guys have a good night.